Hey Chem Kids, Campbell here. In this video, we're going to talk about the rules for calculating with significant figures. Now, you should have just seen the video on the rules for significant figures. So tell me, what numbers count as significant? Can you list them? Well, let's see if you got them right. Anything that's a non-zero digit, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, blah, blah, blah. If it doesn't have a zero, it's significant. But zeros, remember my little thing, zeros in the front, never. Zeros in the middle, always. Zeros at the end, it depends. What does it depend upon? Well, if you see the little dot in the number, right? The decimal. If there's a decimal, yes. The zeros at the end count. It doesn't matter where that decimal is. No, if there's no decimal anywhere. So what's the deal with these calculations? Well, remember that significant digits tell you how precise a measurement is. You know, how great was that ruler you were using. So when you perform calculations with measurements, like length times width times height, you need to be able to specify how precise that instrument was by recording your answer with the proper number of significant figures. You never, ever, 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 ever write down all the numbers your calculator spits out. Okay, so if we're going to record these with the right number of significant figures, the first thing we need to do is talk about rounding. So let's go over the rules of rounding that we're going to use in my class. If the number that's to be dropped is less than a 5, we're just going to drop it. Boop, gone, or make it a 0. If the figure to be dropped is greater or equal to 5, we're going to get rid of it and erase the preceding figure by 1. So what does that mean? Well, here's some sample problems. I want to round these so that I only have 3 significant figures. So these are all non-zero digits, right? Right now I have 4. I only want 3, which means we need to get rid of that number. Well, it's less than 5, so that's great. We can just drop it, and we get 5.33. For this one, we need to get rid of that 8, so we can only have 3 significant figures. Well, it's greater than 5, so we need to round up the 7 to an 8, and we get 3.48. You try the next one. Well, we need to get rid of this 5, so we only have 3 significant figures. So we need to round up. So we're going to make this number 2.56. Now this last one is tricky because I only want 3 significant figures. So I only want those to stay as numbers, and I want to make these numbers not significant. But I can't just eliminate them. I can't just take this number and make it 3, 4, 5, right? Because 345 is way different than 34,525. So what do? Well, in order to make them non-significant without losing the place value, I just make them zeros, right? Zeros at the end are not significant if we get rid of that decimal. So we're going to eliminate this one, right? We're going to drop that one and get rid of that decimal. And then we're going to make these guys zeros. So 34,500. It's still pretty close to 34,525.5, but I didn't completely eliminate the zeros and get 345 because $345 not the same as $34,500. So remember, significant figures, when we round, we need to keep track of the decimal places. So don't just drop them, just don't drop the numbers. If you keep the decimal place where it is by making them zeros. Now, let's talk about calculations, because this is when we're going to have to do this rounding. So let's start with multiplication and division. When you do multiplication and division, your answer has to be rounded so that it is the same number of significant figures as the number with the least amount. So for example, if I take 31.9 and I divide by 7.318, right, this is what my calculator is going to spit out, but don't write that on your test, because if you do, I'm going to do that. We need to have, so this has 3 significant figures, that is 4, so our number can only have 3 significant figures. So we need to chop this part off because that's a 9. We're going to round that up to a 6. So our answer is 4.36. All right, let's try this one. This one's kind of tricky. If I take 30 and I multiply by 13, I get 390. How should I report this number? Well, remember, zeros at the end are not significant, and that means that this 30 only has one significant figure, which means this 390 can only have one significant figure. Well, what do I do? I mean, okay, this is a 9, and I need to get rid of it, but I can't just call this 4, right? Round it up and drop them, because I need to make them zeros so I don't lose my decimal place. So what if I just make it a 0 and round that number up? Now I've got 400. 400 is definitely closer to 390 than 4. So anytime you are doing rounding, make sure that you keep the number of decimal places. If you need to make them insignificant, make them zeros, but don't put a decimal in, right? If we put a decimal, then zeros at the end are significant. All right, one more. What if we take 12.0 and multiply by 0.0025? Well, if you do that, your calculator actually only gives you 0.03. So is that good? Can I just leave that? Well, let's count significant figures. So our first number has 3, but because zeros at the end count. But if we count the next one, zeros in the front, right? Never. So that means I only have 2 decimal places. Does this have 2 decimal places? No, it only has 1 decimal place. So what are we going to do? Well, we have to add a 0, right? 0 at the end, it depends if there's a decimal. This one has a decimal. So if I just write 0.030, then we're good. All right. So let's do some more work on this, and I will see you in class.